Sahana vavatu, Sahano bhunaktu, Sahaviryan karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Okay, this looks good. Welcome back to our weekly Bhagavad Gita class. We continue our study of Chapter 3, Karma Yoga, and we'll begin as usual with some brief recitation. We'll start with verse 30. As always, while you listen to me, please glance at the meaning so you know what you're chanting, and then repeat. Mayi sarvani karmani, Mayi sarvani karmani, Sanyasyadhyatma chetasa, Sanyasyadhyatma chetasa, Nirashir nirmamo bhutva, Nirashir nirmamo bhutva, Yudhyasva vigatajvaraha, Yudhyasva vigatajvaraha, Ye me matamidam nityam, Ye me matamidam nityam, Anutishtanti manavaha, Anutishtanti manavaha, Shraddhavanto nasuyanto, Shraddhavanto nasuyanto, Muchyante te vikarmabihi, Muchyante te vikarmibihi, Ye tve tadapyasu yanto, Ye tve tadapyasu yanto, Nanutishtanti me matam, Nanutishtanti me matam, Sarvajnana vimudhanstan, Sarvajnana vimudhanstan, Vidhi nashtana chetasaha, Vidhi nashtana chetasaha, Sadrasham cheshtate swasyaha, Sadrasham cheshtate swasyaha, Prakritir jnanavanapi, Prakritir jnanavanapi, Prakritam yanti bhutani, Prakritam yanti bhutani, Nigraha kim karishyati, Nigraha kim karishyati, Indriyasyendriyasyarte, Indriyasyendriyasyarte, raga-dwesha vyavastito, raga-dwesha vyavastito, tayor navashamagachet, tayor navashamagachet, tau hyasya paripantinau, tau hyasya paripantinau. Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha, Paradharmat swanushthitat, Paradharmat swanushthitat, Swadharme nidhanam shreyaha, Swadharme nidhanam shreyaha, Paradharmo bhayavaha, Paradharmo bhayavaha. Arjuna vacha, Arjuna vacha, Atakena prayukto yam, Atakena prayukto yam, Papam charati purushaha, Papam charati purushaha, Anichannapi varshneya, Anichannapi varshneya, Baladiva niyojitaha, Baladiva niyojitaha, Shri Bhagavanu vacha, Shri Bhagavanu vacha, Kama hesha krodha hesha, Kama hesha krodha hesha, Rajo guna samudbhavaha, Rajo guna samudbhavaha, Mahashano mahapapma, Mahashano mahapapma, Vidyenamiha varinam, Vidyenamiha varinam. That's a good place to pause in our chanting. Let's come back. Let's see, we finished verse 32, and we'll start with verse 33 today. 33. Good. And you'll remember that in our discussion of karma yoga, karma yoga is not what you do, it's the attitude with which you do something. Washing your dishes or going to work on Monday morning is karma. Washing your dishes or going to work with a prayerful attitude, recognizing Ishvara as the karma paladata, as a giver of the fruits of actions, and dedicating your deeds to Ishvara by following dharma, it's this attitude that distinguishes any action as being karma yoga. In general, karma yoga then converts ordinary activities into a kind of spiritual practice. Now, our topic here has to do with instinctive behavior. So instinctive behavior is different than intentional behavior. Intentional behavior is part of karma yoga. Karma yoga means to intentionally act, to set aside your own agenda, to intentionally act to follow dharma with the proper attitude. So here we're going to talk briefly about unintentional behavior, which is what we call instinctive behavior. Let's see that verse again. Sadrisham cheshtate swasyaha, sadrisham cheshtate swasyaha, prakritir jnanavanapi, prakritir jnanavanapi, prakritam yanti bhutani, prakritam yanti bhutani, nigraha kim karishyati, nigraha kim karishyati. So here in this next two verses, Sri Krishna wants to explain how raga-dwesha are so powerful. Raga, the compulsion to go after something you want. Dwesha, the compulsion to run away from what you don't want. These compulsions are so powerful, they overwhelm your mind and intellect and literally rob you of your free will. They cause you, they coerce you to act in certain ways, and this unintended action here we can loosely call instinctive. And Sri Krishna here describes that kind of instinctive behavior is like the behavior of an animal. You kick a dog and it barks. The dog is hungry and it eats. If you kick a dog, the dog doesn't think, should I bark or not? If the dog is hungry, it doesn't think, should I eat or not? Well, when we are overwhelmed by raga-dwesha, our behavior is degraded, so to speak, to that of a dog. And that's what Sri Krishna describes here. Sadrasham cheshtate swasyaha prakritehe. Cheshtate. One behaves, sadrasham, according to, that looks like an adverb, one behaves according to swasyaha prakritehe, according to swasya, one's own prakriti. And here prakriti is used in a very ordinary way, one's nature, one's instinctive nature, will add that. So one cheshtate, one behaves according to one's instinctive nature. We're talking about one overcome by raga-dwesha. Jnanavanapi, even a wise person, even a highly learned person. He's not talking about an enlightened person here, but although an enlightened person can behave in instinctive ways in certain situations, not driven by raga-dwesha, but driven by pure instinct. If an enlightened person who knows that they will never die, an enlightened person having recognized the immortality of one's true nature, that enlightened person is standing on a street corner and a big truck comes racing towards that enlightened person, you can be sure the enlightened person is going to jump away from the truck. That really, and it's not that the enlightened person thinks it over. Should I jump? After all, my true nature is enlightened. Of course, the enlightened person doesn't have, there's no time for any such mental discourse. The enlightened person jumps instinctively. So jnanavanapi, even an enlightened person can be driven by instinctive behavior. Prakritam yanti bhutani. Bhutani, in the third line, bhutani, all beings, yanti, they proceed, they conform to prakritam, to their nature. All beings behave instinctively. Nigraha kim karishyati. Kim karishyati, what is the use of nigraha, self-control? And here the context is, once you are overwhelmed by raga-dwesha, there's no hope of self-control. Do you remember that slippery slope we saw back in chapter 2? Those 2 verses that show how we get swept away from our reasonable dharmic thinking and get swept down this ethical slope into adharma. We won't return to all of that. But here, Sri Krishna is talking about the hazard of being overcome by this raga-dwesha, which robs us of our ability to freely choose our actions. This is the problem of raga-dwesha. That's what he says. Nigraha kim karishyati. What is the use of restraint? Means once raga-dwesha have hijacked your thinking, I like that expression. Once your thinking has been hijacked by raga-dwesha, it's too late. Remember, we got swept away down that slippery slope. You have to catch yourself right at the beginning of being carried away. Once you start to be carried away, it's too late to do anything. So here, Sri Krishna is talking about, and we'll see more about the consequences of being carried away when you're overwhelmed by raga-dwesha. And remember our definitions. So often raga-dwesha is just casually translated as likes and dislikes. That's technically not incorrect, but it's really inadequate. Raga is a compulsion to chase after what you want. Dwesha is a compulsion to run away from what you don't want. Those definitions are important. We'll continue. Indriyasyendriyasyarte, indriyasyendriyasyarte, raga-dwesha vyavastitau, raga-dwesha vyavastitau, tayor navashama gachet, tayor navashama gachet, tau hyasya paripantinau, tau hyasya paripantinau. Indriyasya arte, raga-dwesha vyavastitau. Raga is starting the second line. Raga and dwesha, it has a dual termination there. Raga and dwesha, vyavastitau, they exist. They are present. They are present, now back up to the end of the first line, arte. They are present with regard to artha. Here artha means object. Artha has many meanings. Here it means object. What kind of object? Indriyasya, indriyasya. And the word is repeated to give you the sense of each and every indriya. Indriya means sense organ. So indriyasya indriyasya arte means with regard to whatever you see, hear, taste, smell, or touch, with regard to all of our five senses, actually six senses. Mind, you remember, is considered a sixth sense. So with regard to all six of these inner organs, we have raga and dwesha, which means in response to anything you see, hear, taste, smell, or touch, or in response to anything you think about, you can fall subject to this compulsion of raga and dwesha. And Sri Krishna warns Arjuna and warns all of us, tayoho navasham agachet. Navasham agachet. Don't fall under the spell. Vasha means control. Don't fall under the control, tayoho, of these two, of raga-dwesha. Don't fall under the spell of raga-dwesha. Don't let raga and dwesha drag you about. Tau he, because, or indeed, in the third line, you have to break the words apart. He asya. He, indeed, or because, tau, those two, raga, dwesha, asya paripantinao. Asya, for any person, they are your paripanti, enemies. And the word used for enemy here is very interesting. Paripanti, pantin means path. Paripantin is one who stands on a path. And here the idea is one who stands on your path, blocking your way. And here, not one, two. Mr. Raga and Mr. Dwesha are standing on the path, your path of spiritual growth. We'll expand the metaphor. You're traveling down this path of life. You're traveling down this path of spiritual growth, and blocking your way are two thugs, two thieves. Better yet, two kidnappers are blocking your way. And they are ready, not just, you can call them thieves, but they're going to do more than just steal. Well, thieves, in a sense, they steal away your mind. They steal away your self-control. Maybe better to call them kidnappers, because they rob you of your free will. They rob you. They take you away. They carry you away. And this is what we discussed in chapter 2, in those two verses, 63 and 4. I might be off by one or two. Anyway, those two verses that describe being dragged away down this slippery slope. So these are the two kidnappers. Put it in context. Remember that Arjuna, on the battlefield, was almost kidnapped, so to speak, by his own dwesha. When in chapter 1, when Arjuna looked across the battlefield and saw all of his beloved family members on both sides of the battlefield, and he knew that so many of them were going to perish in a terrible battle that was about to begin, Arjuna was overcome by dwesha. Remember our definition, a compulsion to run away from what you don't want. And at the end of chapter 1, Arjuna had actually proposed to Sri Krishna, maybe let me go live a life of alms. Let me become a sannyasi, a Hindu monk. Let me leave this battlefield and wander from village to village begging for my alms and living the life of a sannyasi, a religious mendicant. So Arjuna was about to have his mind hijacked by dwesha, not raga and dwesha, specifically by dwesha. And of course, it's Sri Krishna that rescues him, so to speak, from being dragged away by that kidnapper, and we'll see how Sri Krishna continues to help Arjuna. He continues in the very next verse. Sri Krishna says, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha, paradharmat swanushthitat, paradharmat swanushthitat, swadharme nidhanam shreyaha, swadharme nidhanam shreyaha, paradharmo bhayavaha, paradharmo bhayavaha. Swadharmaha. Swadharma, you might know that word. Dharma, you know. Dharma is your duty. And swadharma, one's own duty. Swadharma, one's own duty, meaning one's own responsibilities, are shreyan. They are best. Vigunaha, even, by the way, I don't like my translation here, even when they're done poorly. I think it's actually accurate to the Sanskrit, but I think there's a better way of translating it. This translation I did decades ago, by the way. Nice, interesting to see how I translated things long ago and how differently I would translate things today. Anyway, vigunaha is something that's defective. And what is defective here is swadharma, your own duty. The context, of course, is Arjuna's situation. Arjuna is on the battlefield about to fight against his own beloved family members. Fighting against his family members is both swadharma, it's his duty, but it is also viguna. It's also defective in the sense that it's problematic. It's harmful. It's terrible. That's the sense of viguna here. But yet, swadharma, your own duties, vigunaha api, even if they are terrible and defective, they are still shreyan. They're still better compared to, in the second line, in comparison to paradharmat, compared to the dharma, the duties or lifestyles of para, another person, su anishthitat. I'm breaking the word apart. Even the duties of another, which are su anishtata, which are easy to follow, which are pleasant to follow. I'll paraphrase the first half. Performing your own duties, even if those duties are difficult, is preferable to taking on the duties of another, even if the performance of those duties is very pleasant. So this very directly addresses Arjuna's desire to leave the battlefield and live the life of a Hindu monk. Living the life of a Hindu monk for Arjuna is definitely swanushtita. It is pleasant. It is something pleasant to do, but it is definitely paradharma. It is the lifestyle for someone else, not the right thing for Arjuna to do, because Arjuna is a kshatriya. This happens to be his personal responsibility to fight in the war. And please don't forget, we discussed at the very beginning of our study of the Bhagavad Gita, that the war was a dharma yuddha, a righteous war, defined in this way, a war in which not fighting the war causes more harm than fighting the war. And if Arjuna were to abandon his responsibility, swadharma, if Arjuna abandons his swadharma, leaves the battlefield, the Pandavas will certainly lose the battle, and the harm caused to not just the warriors, but to the entire society, the harm caused will be far greater than it would have been if Arjuna remained on the battlefield and fighting. And Sri Krishna's, by the way, that applies to us all. This is not just a message for Arjuna. This is a message for us all. There are times in life where life just gets difficult. And what's the interesting parallel? I just thought in my own life, a situation like this. And the memory that just came was during our 3-year residential course taught by Swami Tadatmananda in his ashram in Pennsylvania. We students had to do lots of work. We were actually living in the ashram and building it at the same time. When we came there to live in 1986, it was in very crude shape. And so while living there, we built it up. And I was involved actually in construction activities. And I remember very clearly the construction activities were really demanding, and I felt that I would rather just sit and study and meditate. Interesting. My desire was to abandon my swadharma as a student, as a resident, as a member of this 3-year course. My responsibility was to participate in all this construction work, which was a considerable amount of work. It was demanding, it was physical, it was tiring. So not surprisingly, I wanted to avoid it. I would have preferred to live a more contemplative life, to have more time for meditation and for study. Of course, we had our classes were ongoing, but in between the classes, we would work quite a bit. So this is a good metaphor, because if I had abandoned my responsibility as a student to continue to do the construction work and instead spent more time in my room meditating and studying, that would have caused more harm in several ways, in a lot of ways. One way is that the work was karma yoga. I was supposed to be engaged in that work with the right attitude. In fact, my frustration led me to question my attitude towards the work and resolve the conflict. There's only a conflict between work and study if you make it into a conflict. As soon as I understood that that work was part of my spiritual practice. It took me a while to understand that, but eventually I came to understand that construction work on the ashram grounds was part of my spiritual practice. I adopted the attitude of karma yoga, and my conflict was resolved. I no longer felt resentful that I didn't have more time for meditation and study. I no longer felt resentful about doing all the very difficult, tiring construction work. That conflict got completely resolved when I accepted that difficult work as my swadharma. And that's what the first half is all about. It says your own swadharma, your own responsibilities, vigunaha, even though they're difficult, that is, they are shreyan. It is better. Performing your own duties is shreyan, is better than abandoning them and doing what you would prefer to do. Now, back to the battlefield. That's how the verse applies to us. But here, back to Sri Krishna addressing Arjuna, Krishna tells Arjuna flat out, swadharme nidhanam shreyaha. He says, swadharme, in the performance of your own duties, even nidhanam, death, is shreyas, best. Nidhanam means dying. Dying there on the battlefield, Sri Krishna says, is preferable to walking away from the battlefield and taking to the life of a wandering monk. Better to fulfill your duties, and in this very extreme case, on the battlefield. Fortunately, our lives may resemble battlefields in some ways, but nothing like the actual, literal battlefield that Arjuna faced. So, swadharme nidhanam shreyaha. And you can say nidhanam, death, is actually like a metaphor to represent all the difficulties of life. And the most difficult thing is death. The most terrible thing in life is death. So Sri Krishna uses that as a metaphor. And that is nidhanam, representing all the difficulties of life, swadharme, to encounter all those difficulties while engaged in your own responsibilities, swadharma. He says it is shreyas, it is best. On the other hand, paradharmaha, abandoning your duties and going for the dharma of para, of another, adopting another lifestyle, leaving your responsibilities behind and doing something else, Sri Krishna says here, is bhayavaha. It is fearful. It has negative consequences. For Arjuna, we discussed the negative consequences. The Pandavas will lose the battle. The society will be ruined as a result. But in a more general sense, whenever one abandons swadharma, one's own responsibilities, the consequences can't be good. The consequences are going to be problematic. And that's Sri Krishna's message here. Now, Arjuna his ears apparently perked up when Sri Krishna said tau paripantinao, those two, raga and dwesha, are your paripantins, are your enemies. So Sri Krishna is thinking about enemies. Now, this is a new topic comes here. Arjuna is about to speak. He's about to raise a question to Sri Krishna. And the question has to do with these enemies. There are two kinds of enemies. One is the very obvious kind of enemy, the kind of enemy Arjuna faces on the battlefield, the kind of enemy you might face in certain aspects of your life. Sometimes your boss at work can be an enemy. Sometimes an obnoxious neighbor or relative can seem like an enemy. Certainly problems like financial problems are an enemy. Illness is an enemy. So these are the enemies of life. But there's a different kind of enemy. All those enemies of life are out there, outside in the world. There's another kind of enemy which is inside. So raga and dwesha are enemies. They're not external enemies. They're internal enemies. So our topic now shifts to dealing with those internal enemies, and that topic is introduced by Arjuna's question. Arjuna vacha, atakena prayuktoyam, atakena prayuktoyam, papam charati purushaha, anechannapi varshneya, balariva niyojitaha. Arjuna's question begins, Ata, now, kena prayuktaha, compelled, kena, by what? Compelled by what? Last word is ayam, this, and drop down to the second line, purushaha. The word is purusha. Purusha means person. The pu becomes long, purushaha, for some poetic reasons. So, ayam purushaha, this person, a person, any person, kena prayuktaha, compelled by what? Papam charati, commits sin. To paraphrase, a person commits sin compelled by what? We've been talking about raga-dwesha, and Sri Krishna is going to respond in just a moment with that raga-dwesha. But here Arjuna is beginning to recognize the seriousness of the problem of raga-dwesha. That's what he's asking about. Ayam purushaha, a person, papam charati, a person commits sin. Kena prayuktaha, compelled by what? So Arjuna recognizes that it is prayukta, a compulsion. And he makes it very clear, anichan api, in the third line. Api, even though anichan, even though a person doesn't desire to do that papa, to do that sin, even though a person doesn't want to commit a sinful deed, that person is compelled to commit a sinful deed. Compelled by what? Arjuna asks. Varshneya. Varshneya means he addresses Krishna as one of the Vrishni lineage. Vrishni is the name of Sri Krishna's family lineage. So Varshneya, O member of the Vrishni lineage, O Krishna, what is it that compels a person to commit a sin even when they don't want to? That person who is, in the last line, niyojitaha. Niyojitaha again means compelled. Just another way of saying compelled. Prayuktaha and niyojitaha are virtually synonyms. Both of them mean compelled, impelled, driven. Driven is a good translation here. Niyojitaha, driven balat eva, as though by force, as though forcibly, as though some, remember I gave this odd metaphor before, a kidnapper inside of you who has, not a kidnapper, I used the word hijacker, someone who has hijacked your intellect, hijacked your free will, someone who is forcefully directing your behavior without taking your permission. Now, hijackers don't take your permission. They do what they want. Okay. So this is Arjuna's question. What is it that compels a person to commit a sin even when they don't want to? What is it that's like an inner force compelling them forcibly? To which Sri Krishna responds, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Kama Hesha, Krodha Hesha, Kama Hesha, Krodha Hesha, Rajoguna Samudbhavaha, Rajoguna Samudbhavaha, Mahashano Mahapapma, Mahashano Mahapapma, Vidyenamiha Varinam, Vidyenamiha Varinam. So Arjuna asks, what is it that compels a person? And Sri Krishna describes that compulsive force with two words. Eshaha, that compulsive force is kama, desire. And kama means raga and dwesha. That compulsion to get what you want, raga and dwesha, the compulsion to run away from what you don't want. Both of them are combined into the word here, kama, desire. Kama esha, that compulsive force is kama. Krodha esha, that compulsive force is krodha, anger. And here, perhaps the idea of adding the word anger, the Kama already makes a point, raga-dwesha. And why does Sri Krishna add that word krodha, which means anger? And I think it's to describe the forceful and negative nature of that compulsion. Compulsions can be positive, right? It's possible to have a desirable compulsion. Some people are compelled to keep everything clean and tidy. Of course, it can go overboard. But in general, to be compelled to keep things neat and tidy is not a negative compulsion. Someone can be compelled to go to work and work very hard. A compulsive worker. There are problems, of course, in being a compulsive worker, but it's not necessarily a negative thing. So Sri Krishna wants to make it clear that the compulsion that we're talking about here is very forceful and very negative. So he uses that word krodha to emphasize the negative and forceful nature of raga and dwesha. And this compulsive force is rajoguna samudbhavaha. The compulsive force is samudbhava. It is born of rajoguna, rajas plus guna. When the two words, rajas and guna, when the two words combine, rajas and guna becomes rajoguna. Rajoguna, rajas, you remember, is a principle of activity and passion. So your mind is comprised of the three gunas: sattva, principle of balance; rajas, principle of activity and passion; and tamas, principle of darkness and lethargy. All three of these influences or factors are present in your mind. Sri Krishna says, of the three, this raga and dwesha are born of the guna of rajas. And this Esha, this compulsive force, is mahashana. Maha ashana. Ashana means eating. Maha ashana. One who is a great devourer. Glutton I have here. Great devourer. One who's a great devourer. And great devourer means one who's never satisfied. We're going to come to that in just a moment. I'll hold off on that. But notice that raga and dwesha are never completely satisfied. You satisfy one desire and another pops up. You satisfy that desire and another comes up. You satisfy that desire and another comes up. So in that sense, mahashana, in fact, a very good translation would be insatiable. Literally, it means a glutton or a great devourer are very literal. But a more nuanced translation here would be insatiable. That raga and dwesha, that coerces you and compels you, is mahashana. It is insatiable, and it is maha papma. It is the great sinner. Great sinner in the sense that it is the root cause for adharma. And that's a really important point. Raga and dwesha is absolutely the root, raga and dwesha exist because you're not enlightened. Let's get the basics here. If you were enlightened, if you knew your true nature to be full and complete, if you experienced perfect peace and contentment at all times, that by definition means you are free from raga, dwesha. So the root cause for the cause for raga and dwesha is the absence of enlightenment. Absence of enlightenment means ignorance about your true nature. So look at the sequence. Because of ignorance of your true nature, you find, Puja Swami Tadatmananda did this analysis so brilliantly and clearly. He made it so clear that he used the term, and you've heard it from me as well, he used the term self-non-recognition. Due to self-non-recognition, the failure to appreciate your own divinity, the failure to appreciate your innate nature as being perfect, content, and an abode of perfect peace. Your inability to recognize that, he called self-non-recognition. In the absence of that recognition, you feel incomplete. You feel inadequate. You feel needy. You feel clingy. And raga-dwesha naturally arises because you feel compelled, you feel compelled to get whatever will make you feel more complete. Dwesha, you feel compelled to run away from anything that will make you feel less complete. So because of self-non-recognition comes raga and dwesha, and because of raga and dwesha comes adharma, right? Because of raga-dwesha comes adharma. Just to make that point very clear. If you were perfectly content right now, or at any time, if you felt absolutely no raga-dwesha, no compulsion to get anything, no compulsion to run away from anything, if you felt such perfect peace and total contentment, why would you commit an act of adharma? What would make you commit an act of adharma? Acts of adharma are driven by this raga-dwesha, and raga-dwesha are the result of self-non-recognition. So, therefore, this raga-dwesha here are called mahapapma, the great sinner, the cause for performing acts, committing acts of adharma, the cause that makes you hurt other people or do improper things. And Sri Krishna concludes that line of thought by saying, Vidhi enam iha vairinam. Breaking the words apart, Vidhi enam iha vairinam. Iha, here, in this life. Enam, this one, this compulsive force of raga-dwesha. Vidhi, Arjuna, vidhi, you should know. Please understand, Arjuna. Vidhi, know it, enam, this compulsive force of raga-dwesha, know it to be vairinam, know it to be the enemy, and the with a capital T. The primary enemy in life is not the enemy outside. It's not the angry boss. It's not the obnoxious neighbor. It's not the stock market. It's not, what was the other example? It's not ill health. The real enemy in life is within us. And you've heard it said so often that we become our own worst enemies when we're overcome by this raga-dwesha. And we'll see these two more verses to end our class. And in these final two verses, Sri Krishna describes the power and consequence of this enemy, this inner enemy of raga-dwesha. He says, Dhume navriyate vanhir, Dhume navriyate vanhir, Yatha darsho malena cha, Yatha darsho malena cha, Yatol benavrito garbhas, Yatol benavrito garbhas, Tata te nedam avritam, Tata te nedam avritam. Start in the last line. Tena, by that inner enemy, that compulsive force of raga-dwesha, by that idam avritam. Idam, this is avritam, covered. This is covered, and the word this contextually means your wisdom, your sense of what is right and wrong, dharma and adharma, your free will. Idam represents all of that. So idam, your ability to choose the path of righteousness, your ability to avoid the path of unrighteousness, your ability to use free will and follow the right path. Idam avritam, that power is avritam. It is covered. It is covered in the sense of overpowered, overwhelmed. Tena, by that inner compulsive force of raga-dwesha. And then he gives 3 metaphors to describe how your inner wisdom is overcome by the inner enemy, or by your inner free will is overcome by the inner enemy. And he uses that idea of covering. So just like your wisdom gets covered, and he gives the first metaphor, dhumena avriyate vanhihi. Just like vanhi, fire, avriyate is covered, dhumena, by smoke. So a fire can burn brightly, but sometimes the smoke that arises from that fire, the smoke can be so thick that the fire is obscured. So like smoke obscures shining fire, in the same way the compulsive force of raga-dwesha can obscure your inner wisdom, your sense of right and wrong. Second metaphor, yatha adarshaha malena. And you have to bring down the verb avriyate from the first line. Yatha, just as adarsha. Adarsha is a mirror. Avriyate gets covered. A mirror gets covered malena by dirt, by dust. A mirror would normally reflect very brightly your face or anything that in front of it. But when that mirror is thickly covered with dirt, it no longer reflects. So like a mirror covered with dirt no longer reflects light. Your mind, covered, overwhelmed, overpowered by this coercive force of raga-dwesha, causes your inner wisdom, your ability to discern dharma and dharma, gets covered. Like the mirror is covered by dirt, your inner wisdom gets covered by raga-dwesha. Last metaphor, yatha ulbena avrita garbhas. Here, garbha refers not to the ulbena. Actually, my translation is not very literal. Again, old translation. Here, garbhas actually refers to a fetus in the womb, which is avrita, which is covered by ulbena. Ulbena can refer to whatever covers a fetus. It could be amniotic fluid. In fact, that would be the best meaning. So the fetus in the womb is covered by amniotic fluid. And something to bear in mind, to understand that metaphor, it's important to recognize that in ancient times, any body fluid was considered impure. Body fluid would include, like, saliva is impure, urine is considered impure, any body fluid. So you don't want to have contact with any body, and this is the ancient thinking. So therefore that amniotic fluid is a body fluid and was considered very impure. So in ancient times they considered it terrible that the fetus helplessly was immersed in that amniotic fluid. in the ancient worldview, that was considered a very undesirable thing. Maybe it's not so undesirable. I think it must be actually quite pleasant. But this was the ancient worldview. In order to understand the metaphor, you have to understand the ancient worldview. It was considered terrible to be immersed in this amniotic fluid. So just as that fetus is helplessly immersed in amniotic fluid, in the same way your inner wisdom, discernment of dharma and adharma, becomes overcome or overpowered by raga-dwesha. Then Sri Krishna concludes in this topic. Avritam jnanam etena, jnavritam jnanam etena, jnanino nityavarina, jnanino nityavarina, kamarupena kaunteya, kamarupena kaunteya, dushpurena nalena cha, dushpurena nalena cha. Jnaninaha jnanam. Jnaninaha in the second line and jnanam in the first. Jnaninaha, of a wise person, not an enlightened person. Where it was referring to that inner wisdom, and inner wisdom in the sense of discerning the difference between dharma and adharma, the difference between right and wrong. That inner wisdom, jnaninaha, for that wise, mature person, back in the first line, their jnanam, their knowledge, their wisdom, their ability to discern the difference between dharma and adharma, that discernment, avritam, gets covered. Gets covered by what? Etena, at the end of the first line, gets covered by this. By this what? Drop down a line, nitya vairina. By this literally eternal enemy. Eternal is not the right translation though. Relentless enemy. This raga-dwesha here described as a relentless enemy. And why it's relentless we'll see in the last line. So we'll hold that off. So the wisdom of the wise gets covered by this relentless enemy of raga-dwesha. This relentless enemy, which is kama-rupena, this relentless enemy, which is in the form of kama, desire. And kama, desire, means raga and dwesha. Kaunteya, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, the wisdom of the wise is covered by this relentless enemy, the relentless enemy of kama, the relentless enemy of raga-dwesha, which is dushpurena analena. This relentless enemy, which is dushpurena, difficult to satisfy, insatiable, like analena. Anala is a word we use for fire. So it is like an insatiable fire. Sri Krishna concludes this discussion that raga and dwesha, this inner enemy that compels you constantly, is like an inner fire, is like an insatiable fire, and the metaphor is really vivid. Alam means the word for fire here, an-ala. And it's nice to know the meaning of that word, an-ala. Alam is the Sanskrit word for enough. Like Hindi mein, bas kehte hai. So when you're being served food, people say bas. That's enough. So bas means enough, and alam means enough in exactly the same way. So here, the word for fire is an-alam, not enough. Imagine someone who at a table, they never said bas. They always, or kuch, more. Well, fire is like that, analam, that which is never satisfied, that which never has enough. You can go on feeding fire, feeding fuel, wood, into a fire. The fire will consume as much as you put in. The fire will never be satiated. The fire will never receive a sufficient amount of wood. The fire will go on consuming as much wood as you put in. We can say that the fire is insatiable. So Sri Krishna concludes with this very stern warning, and that is that inner compulsive force is insatiable, which means you will never come out of raga-dwesha by pacifying that raga-dwesha, by getting what you want, by avoiding what you don't want, by trying to satisfy those inner demands. You will never, ever come out of raga-dwesha. In fact, the problem only gets worse. Just one last point, interesting point. Did you ever if you were outside and you ever start a fire for warmth, or like a campfire, you may have had the experience, the more wood you put in the fire, the wider, the bigger the fire becomes, and a bigger fire requires more wood to burn brightly. A small fire requires less wood to burn brightly. A big fire requires more wood to burn with the same amount of brightness. That fire represents our raga-dwesha. Someone who excessively satisfies their raga-dwesha. Someone who is, what is the word, hedonist? Someone who is a hedonist, who really works on enjoyment, their fire of desire grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and the bigger the fire of desire grows, the bigger their demands grow. This is a problem of hedonism. So the solution is, as a start, to avoid being focused on satisfying our desires. And this is where where spiritual life begins. You remember our discussion before. When you recognize that no amount of worldly happiness will ever lead you to feel perfectly content and perfect peace, that recognition is the beginning of genuine spiritual life. When you recognize that no amount of enjoyment will ever make you feel complete and satisfied, then you begin to change your orientation and you begin to wean yourself away, so to speak, from raga and dvesha. We'll discuss that more in our next class. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Hamratangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.